Shadows of the Vampire. The moon, swollen and pitiless, dangled over the twisted landscape, casting its pallid light across the skeletal remains of trees long stripped of their leaves. I had come too far, deeper into the valley where few dared wander after sunset, into the land that held its breath between dusk and dawn. The air itself felt wrong, heavier, as if steeped in whispers that slithered beneath the surface, unseen but ever present. Pressing against my skin with unseen hands, I had heard the stories, the murmurs of travelers who spoke in hushed tones about figures moving in the mist, about the silent ones who watched from the darkness with eyes that gleamed like wet obsidian. I had laughed then, dismissing their fear as nothing more than the echoes of folklore clinging to those unwilling to break free from their own superstitions. Now, standing here, feeling the weight of the shadows, I was no longer certain the road was abandoned, ancient and cracked, winding like a serpent through the valley floor, its stones slick with moss, its edges gnawed away by time and neglect. I moved with cautious steps, my breath a shallow rhythm in the silence, my heart a drumbeat against my ribs. No birds called from the branches above, no insects hummed in the underbrush, only the distant whisper of the wind curling through the trees like a voice too faint to catch. Ahead, the village waited, a cluster of broken buildings huddled beneath the weight of the cliffs, their windows dark, their doors warped with age. It had once been a thriving place, a passage for merchants moving between kingdoms, a haven for weary travelers seeking warmth and respite from the harsh wilderness. That was before the stories began, before the fear took hold, before people started disappearing. My steps faltered as I reached the first building, the ruins of an old tavern where the roof had caved in, where the scent of mold and decay clung to the stones like a sickness refusing to die. I felt the weight of unseen eyes, the sensation crawling up my spine, digging into my bones. The village was empty, but it did not feel abandoned. Something was watching, something old, something patient. I took another step, forcing myself forward despite the growing unease, despite the cold breath of dread coiling beneath my ribs. The air had changed, thickened, pulsing with something unseen. The darkness between the buildings was too deep, too solid, as if it did not merely lack light, but consumed it. A shadow shifted at the edge of my vision, a ripple in the suffocating dark. I turned sharply, but nothing remained, only the silent passage between two broken houses, where the street narrowed into a tight corridor of crumbling stone and shattered wood. I did not see movement, but I knew I was no longer alone. My breathing grew shallow, my pulse hammering against my throat. There was a wrongness in the air, something unnatural, something hungry. The stories had always spoken of those who vanished without a trace, of voices carried into the wind, swallowed whole by the night. I had dismissed them, had laughed at them, but now I understood the weight of their terror. Another shadow moved, closer this time, shifting with unnatural grace, slipping between the ruins as though it were part of them, as though it owned them. I could feel it now, the presence lurking beneath the surface of reality, something ancient, something waiting. I was no longer a guest in this place. I was prey. The darkness had changed, shifting in a way that no ordinary shadow could, as though it watched, as though it waited. I took a step forward, my footfall swallowed by the silence, my breath twisting into the cold air like smoke from a dying fire. The village was dead, yet something lived here. Through the ruined alleyways, where shattered homes stood like broken teeth, I saw glimpses of movement, shapes sliding between the cracks of reality. They were neither solid nor insubstantial, neither near nor far, but a presence just beneath the surface, like something that lurked in the depths of the ocean, unseen yet felt. I moved carefully, resisting the urge to turn and flee, knowing that whatever watched me would follow regardless. My pulse was a drumbeat, erratic, my thoughts scattering like brittle leaves in the wind. I needed to find shelter, something more than the decaying bones of forgotten buildings. Ahead, the remnants of an old church loomed, its steeple broken, its wooden doors warped, the windows gaping like hollow eyes. The stories whispered that sacred ground held power, that vampires could not enter unbidden, but I had seen too much already to place trust in legends. Yet I had no choice. I pushed forward, stepping into the threshold where the air changed, thickened, pressing against me with an unseen force. My limbs felt heavier, my vision blurred for a moment, as though something resisted my entry. Then it released me, letting me step fully into the gloom beyond. The pews lay rotting, covered in dust, the altar untouched but worn from time. Candles stood melted and forgotten, long extinguished, their wax forming grotesque shapes against the stone floor. I stepped further inside, the scent of decay mixing with something colder, something metallic. Blood. Not fresh, but lingering, soaked into the bones of the place, into the very foundation. The whispers of the past clung to the air, and I was not alone. A presence unseen yet undeniable lingered in the depths of the church, watching, waiting. Then, from the shadows, a shape moved. The shape stirred within the shadows, shifting with a liquid smoothness that was neither entirely human nor fully beast. It did not stumble, did not hesitate, only moved, emerging from the deep darkness of the church's interior with an unnatural grace. I did not breathe. My pulse battered my ribs, my muscles tensed, the deep-rooted survival instinct screaming at me to run. But I knew that flight would make no difference now. Whatever had been watching me was here, and there was no escaping it. The figure remained just beyond the weak glow of moonlight filtering through the shattered windows, blending into the gloom like an extension of the void itself, its edges indistinct, its presence overwhelming. The sheer force of wrongness that radiated from it pressed against my skin like unseen hands. A cold wave of air rippled through the church, carrying something ancient, something hungry. The candles trembled in their melted remains, flickers of dying flames quivering as though something unseen had brushed against them. It was waiting. For what? I forced myself to take a step back, my breath shallow, my limbs sluggish, as if the very air had conspired against me, turning thick with an unseen force that made movement an agonizing effort. My boots scraped against the stone floor, the tiny sound impossibly loud, cutting through the silence like a blade through flesh. The thing moved. Fluid, effortless, folding into the darkness, vanishing before my eyes, yet I felt it, pressing against the edges of my awareness, circling me, considering me, testing the weight of my fear. The stories had always spoken of vampires as creatures of the night, but nothing had prepared me for this. This was no mere predator, no wandering beast searching for blood. It was more, something beyond hunger, something deeper than mere survival. This thing watched not with the thirst of an animal, but with the careful patience of something that knew it had already won. The weight of it settled into my chest, squeezing, gnawing at my thoughts. I could run, but what good would running do against something that owned the very shadows? I could hide, but what good would hiding do against something that had stalked this village for centuries? There were no options, only the inevitability of the moment, only the truth that the thing in the dark had already decided my fate. Then it whispered. A voice without sound, a breath without air, something that spoke beneath the surface of reality, threading into my thoughts without words. My vision blurred, my body swayed, and the last thing I saw before the world turned into empty blackness was the shape closing in. Blackness swallowed me whole, not the mere absence of light, but something deeper, something alive. It coiled around my thoughts, threading through the edges of my mind, wrapping my senses in an unseen grip. I was not unconscious, yet I was nowhere. I existed, yet I did not. Time lost its meaning. stretching and twisting into something unrecognizable. There was no ground beneath me, no air in my lungs, only the suffocating embrace of something I could not define. Then I felt it, the presence, no longer distant, no longer lurking in the periphery. It was here, closer than breath, closer than thought, watching me, holding me in place within the void. Its shape was uncertain, shifting without truly moving, existing without form, threading itself through the fabric of reality like a parasite burrowing into flesh. I did not struggle, did not scream, for I understood something terrible I had already lost. The stories had never been wrong, only incomplete, only desperate attempts to define something that defied definition. Vampires were not merely creatures of blood and night. They were something else, something older, something more profound in their horror. They were the silent hands that reshaped time, the unseen force beneath the surface of reality, the hunger that did not need flesh to feed. I knew this now, yet knowing was useless. Knowing was only the final act before oblivion. A whisper slid through the darkness, threading into my thoughts without words, without sound. Mine. It was not a question, not an offer. It was a fact, as unyielding as the void surrounding me, as certain as the absence of light. I did not resist, for there was nothing to resist. There was only acceptance, only the realization that what had been me was now something else, something that had no name, something that could no longer escape. Then the world returned. Light did not return all at once, but in fragments, in pieces, little splinters tearing through the absolute void, stabbing into my vision with an overwhelming force. Colors twisted in distorted shapes, depth unraveling, shadows rippling as though they were liquid rather than shade. I was somewhere, yet nothing felt real. Walls stood at impossible angles, too smooth, too dark, shifting with the rhythm of something unseen. The air was thick, saturated with a scent that carried the weight of centuries, blood, decay, forgotten whispers. I knew then, without needing to understand, that I was no longer in the ruined church, no longer in the crumbling remains of the village. I was beyond it, swallowed by something deeper than any place the world had ever known. I took a step, though my body no longer moved as it should, no longer obeyed the natural laws of motion. Each movement carried an unnatural weight, a sluggishness beneath an unseen force, as though the space itself resisted me, shaping itself in defiance of my existence. Then a sound, a slow pulse, rhythmic, wrong. A heartbeat. Not mine. The shadows twisted at the edges of my vision, curling in unnatural formations, writhing with hidden shapes that did not fully emerge. Something lived here, something that had drawn me into its grasp, and now I was part of it. There was no escape. The darkness owned me. The air had changed. It was no longer mere atmosphere, but something alive, something that pulsed beneath the surface of existence like a second heartbeat, slow and heavy, ancient in its rhythm. Each breath I drew felt thicker, like I was inhaling the weight of centuries, the remnants of forgotten voices threading into my lungs. I was somewhere, but I did not know where. The remnants of the ruined church had vanished, replaced by walls that were not truly walls, boundaries that did not remain fixed. The architecture shifted in a way I could not fully comprehend, altering without motion, adjusting without sound, as though I was standing inside the ribcage of something that breathed, something that had always waited beneath the village, unseen, unfathomable. I took a step forward, though my body no longer felt like my own. There was an unnatural resistance in the air, something that pushed against me with unseen hands, something that wanted me to stay still. My mind rebelled against the notion, yet my limbs responded sluggishly, as if that unseen force had already begun its work in reshaping me. Then the pulse shifted. It had been slow before, deliberate, stretching across time like the unbroken beat of something vast. But now it quickened, subtly at first, barely noticeable, yet present beneath the surface. It was aware of me now. I pressed forward, my muscles stiff, my thoughts a tangled mess of fractured logic. I wanted to understand, but there was nothing to understand. There was only presence, only existence, only the absolute certainty that whatever had lurked in the shadows of the ruined village had finally drawn me fully into its grasp. Something moved in the periphery of my vision. Not a physical motion, not a shape stepping forward, but something deeper, something that rippled through the air itself, twisting the fabric of reality in subtle waves. The walls shifted again, responding to its presence, molding themselves into something new, something designed to keep me enclosed. I felt it, pressing against the back of my thoughts, threading into the edges of my mind like fingers crawling beneath the skin. It did not speak, yet its presence carried words without sound, knowledge without language. It was looking at me, not with eyes, not with sight, but with something far worse, something that could reach inside me, something that could unravel what I was piece by piece. I was never alone. I had been claimed. A whisper, silent yet undeniable, slid through the unseen corridors of this place, threading into the darkness like a voice carried by shadows. Mine. The heartbeat quickened again, each pulse shaking the air, rattling my bones, pressing into my thoughts like a rhythmic promise. Then I felt it rise. The world shifted, not with motion, but with presence, as though something vast had stirred beneath the thin veil of reality, pressing against the boundaries of existence with impossible weight. The walls no longer held form, no longer obeyed the laws of nature. They pulsed, rippled, reshaped themselves as though they were not walls at all, but flesh, bending to the command of something unseen. The heartbeat continued, steady, slow, rhythmic in its oppressive certainty. It had become the center of everything, the pulse of the unseen force that ruled this place. I was within it now. A thought, unbidden, crawled through my mind, threading into the edges of my awareness with a certainty I could not deny. There had never been a village. Not truly. There had never been an abandoned town, never been a place where people had once lived, where trade had once flourished. That had been a guise, a deception woven through time to hide the truth. The ruins were not ruins. The history was not history. This place had always been what it is now. It had only ever been this, an ancient structure, an unfathomable entity lurking beneath the surface of recognition, drawing in those foolish enough to step within its grasp. The stories, the legends, the warnings, none had ever captured the real truth. It had always been alive. Something moved beneath me, not a sound, not a shift in weight, but something more profound. I felt it, pressing against the edges of perception, rising from the depths that had no true bottom, emerging from the core of this place. The heartbeat quickened again, its pulse rattling through the thick air. It was coming. The walls no longer held form, but they pressed in, tightening like unseen hands, shifting as though they breathed. Each heartbeat that pulls through the thick air carried something with it, something rising, something breaking free from the unseen depths beneath this place. I felt it before I saw it. The change in the atmosphere, the way reality itself seemed to stretch and strain under an unseen force. The world was shifting, no longer obeying the rules that had governed it before. Something vast was emerging. The stories had warned of vampires, had whispered of blood drinkers lurking in the shadows, had told tales of creatures with fangs and unnatural thirst. But none had spoken of this, of something that defied shape, that defied mere hunger, something more. I stood frozen, every muscle locked under an unseen pressure, every breath weighted down with the suffocating presence of whatever was rising. The space surrounding me tightened, yet it did not close, it did not compress, it changed, forming something else, something designed to trap. The pulse grew louder. The air thickened. Then it broke through. Reality tore. Not like fabric, not like something clean and precise, but like flesh, like bone snapping under an unseen force. The world screamed, not with sound, but with something deeper, something primal. The unseen presence rose from the depths, pressing into existence with the weight of centuries, with the hunger of something that had never needed sustenance, but fed anyway. It was no longer just watching me. It was here. Something formed in the darkness, an impression, a shape without true definition, shifting, altering with each breath, rippling as though the thing was never meant to be seen, never meant to take form in a way my mind could comprehend. But it did, and in doing so, I realized something far worse than fear. I had always been here. Not my body, not my thoughts, but my presence, my place within existence. This thing, this entity, it had always known me, had always awaited this moment. I was not merely prey, not merely a victim stumbling into its grasp. I had been drawn to it, not by mistake, not by circumstance, but by something woven into my very being. I belonged here, and now it knew I understood that. I felt myself unravel, not physically, not in any way that could be seen or understood by human eyes, but in something deeper, something woven into the core of my being. It pulled at me, at the fabric of what I was, peeling away layers of thought, of memory, of self, as if I was only a concept, something waiting to be reshaped. The heartbeat commanded it. Its rhythm never stopped, never wavered, only deepened, only grew louder, until it was no longer a mere pulse, no longer just a sound threading into the thick air. It was everything, the foundation of this place, the pulse of something that had lived for centuries without ever truly living. Something owned me now. I felt it rise. The thing that had waited beneath the village, beneath the ruins, beneath the place that had never truly existed, the entity that had never needed a name. I could not see it, not in the way I had seen things before, but I knew that my vision had changed, had shifted, had bent to something greater than sight. I was inside it now. I had never been prey. I had been chosen. Then came the shift, the moment the air tightened, the walls pulsed with impossible rhythm, and the weight of unseen hands pressed against my chest. I gasped, not out of pain, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming sensation that I was being drawn in, absorbed into something I had no power to resist. The entity had no true form, yet it had always existed in this place. It had lurked beneath the ruins like something waiting to be remembered, something older than time itself, something that had never stopped feeding even when there was no one left to feed upon. The stories about the village had always spoken of shadows moving where they shouldn't, of figures that watched from the empty alleyways, of voices carried by the wind when the streets were supposed to be empty. None of them had ever spoken the truth. The village was never abandoned. It had never belonged to the living in the first place. It was a hunting ground, a place where the walls had worn thin, where reality was fragile enough to let something else slip through. It had existed on borrowed time, waiting for someone foolish enough to step inside and see it for what it truly was. I had stepped inside, and now it had me. Then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in something deeper, something that slithered through the marrow of my bones, coiled through the flesh and muscle, threading into the edges of what had once been me. Mine. Not a declaration, not a warning, just a fact, unshakable, inevitable. The thing beneath the village had never hunted. It had never needed to. It had only ever called, and I had answered. The world folded, reality bending in ways no human mind was meant to comprehend. The heartbeat, deep and rhythmic, no longer pulsed within the walls. It pulsed inside me, threading through my veins, entwining itself with every breath, every thought, every piece of what had once been me. I could no longer tell where the walls ended and I began. The presence surrounded me, pressed into me, not as an invader, but as something already waiting inside, something that had always been inside, lurking beneath layers of thought, waiting for the moment when it could rise to the surface. I was not afraid anymore. That was the worst part. Fear had abandoned me, left me hollow, left me open, left me ready. The thing beneath the ruins had not merely found me, it had known me, had seen into the depths of my existence in a way that no human, no mortal ever could. It was never hunting. It had always been calling, and I had answered. I felt the hunger coil through the thick air, pressing into my chest, threading through the marrow of my bones. It was not a hunger for food, not a hunger for mere sustenance. It was a hunger for presence, for existence itself, something older, something more profound than the human instinct to survive. It did not feed on flesh. It fed on being. And now it was time. The feast would begin. The air tightened, suffocating, thick with the weight of something unseen, something vast. The presence did not merely press against the space around me. It pressed into me, through me, threading itself beneath my skin, unraveling what remained of me piece by piece. I was no longer a guest in this place. I was the feast. The heartbeat thundered now, no longer distant, no longer a mere pulse in the walls. It was inside me, threading through my veins, entwining itself with every breath, every thought, binding my existence with something far older, something far hungrier. It did not ask for permission. It did not need to. Fear had long abandoned me, stripped away by the sheer force of inevitability, leaving behind only acceptance, only the truth that had been waiting from the moment I stepped into the village, the moment that had never been a mistake, only a path leading to the only destination that had ever existed. I had never been searching for this place. It had been searching for me. The walls pulsed, shifting, bending, folding into something that was no longer merely space, no longer merely structure. The thing within them, within me, rose, shaping itself in impossible patterns, adjusting its form, becoming something I recognized. The village had never been real, but I had always been part of it. Then it fed, and in its hunger, I ceased to exist.